Upon initial glance, Colossos Kampf der Giganten, or Battle of the Giants, appears as a world-class wooden roller coaster. Its sheer size is nothing short of impressive, the theming is absolutely intimidating, and it's marketed as this must-do experience that establishes it as the clear headliner of Heide Park. And yet, something is missing. Something that prevents it from reaching that world-class status and instead falling into the category of pretty good, but not amazing. And in today's review, I'm going to discuss what is missing from Heide Park's Colossus, and how with just a few adjustments, the ride experience could have been a lot different than what we know today. It all starts back at the ride's opening in 2001. This was the first ever prefabricated wooden roller coaster from famed ride manufacturer Intamin. Traditionally, wooden coasters were assembled with the lumber brought over to the job site and crews manually cutting each individual piece by hand to form whatever section of track was needed at that spot. You can have the most talented crews on the planet, but there's still human error. Intamin said, what if we machine cut each individual piece and put that together in a factory so that when we ship it over to the job site, you can just snap it in place like a Lego set? Colossus was the guinea pig, and it was immensely popular when it opened. With a height of 164 feet, maximum speed of 68 miles per hour, and over 4,400 feet of track, there simply was nothing else quite like it at the time. And that was the beginning of a new line of wooden roller coasters that would unfortunately only span 4 projects. Balder at Sweden's Liseberg, El Toro at Six Flags Great Adventure, and then finally T-Express at Everland in South Korea. And for a while, people questioned why there weren't more of these. At least, until they started having problems. After 15 years of operation, Colossus closed mid-2016 and would sit standing but not operating for 3 years. Heide Park, as well as their parent company Merlin, would have to make the decision of, do we make the investment to revitalizing this attraction, or do we bulldoze it and start over? Thankfully, they made what I believe was the right call and invested over 3 million euros into a full retracking. This new track was more durable and would better distribute the ride forces, which would keep Colossus smooth for years to come. And since this retracking, those other Intamin prefabs have had to do something similar, a large upgrade to the track if the parks want to keep them around. But with that retracking, Heide Park and Merlin brought on a brand new upgraded theme for Colossus. The entire station would be transformed with this new Stranger Things-like vibe. There's now a massive giant statue out front that's ripping up a section of track, and you blast through with fire effects and mist, and it's much more imposing. Heide Park was making a statement with Colossus that it was back and better than ever. Or so we hoped. I unfortunately never got the opportunity to experience the original Colossus. My first visit to Heide Park was during that 3-year hiatus when Colossus was unfortunately looking rather sad. It wouldn't be until my most recent visit in 2024 when I finally got to experience the ride. I had done 2 other prefabs with El Toro and Balder, and with El Toro being one of my favorite rides in the entire world, I was really intrigued to know what its older cousin was like. And unfortunately, the answer I got was, it's the older cousin that's all talk and no walk. Colossus may have the looks, but it does not have the forces that I had come to know with El Toro. Despite its surprisingly similar layout, where El Toro brings in sharp ejector airtime hills and brilliant pacing, Colossus has floater airtime, if any, and pacing that is a little all over the place. Really good at times, but pretty slow at others. So what happened? Well, you gotta first give Intamin a little bit of a break because this was their first prefab. Sure, they had done other wooden roller coasters in the past, but this was a new style of ride, so naturally, it makes sense that El Toro is the superior model. It came 5 years later. They had learned from Colossus, so okay, I understand that. Supposedly, in that initial iteration of Colossus, the ride did have ejector airtime and ran faster, but it was too much for the track and a big reason why it needed an upgrade in the first place. So if you experienced Colossus pre-2019, your experience was fundamentally different than what it is today. Sure, none of the profiling changed, all the original layout remained the same, but some trims were added to help regulate the speed. And if it means keeping the ride around for years to come, then I completely understand. I mean, we've seen how El Toro has been kind of a pain for Six Flags Great Adventure, how it's even had a few incidents because of its track. Whenever you have a ride that exerts that strong of forces, it's not too surprising that extra maintenance comes with it. So let's walk through the actual ride experience of Colossus Battle of the Giants and break down some of those specific moments. So first off, Colossus is located in the back of Heide Park. You'll walk directly underneath the lift hill to enter the queue, which is actually surprisingly small given its size. Just a couple of switchbacks, not a ton of theming. I do appreciate the old Colossus logo, like it's been uncovered, buried over time. And then you enter your very dark station, which I said reminds me a lot of Stranger Things. Or like an alternative version of Wicker Man at Alton Towers, where there's this sheet directly above you with a projection explaining the story and what's going on. And it's okay. Basically, the story is that you as riders have to scream to stop the beasts and escape, which is a little odd, especially considering at the end of the ride you go through the beast's mouth, so I guess that means we lost. But then we come out the other end, and so maybe we did escape? I don't really know. It's a little vague. But I love all the trees in the station with those vines. They light up when the train dispatches, which is a great visual. And all of this is happening while you're hearing this amazing soundtrack from Imascore. Absolutely love the work they do. If you've ridden El Toro or one of those other Intamin pre-fabricated coasters, the trains are almost identical. 2 riders across with 3 rows per car, a total of 30 passengers per train. That is 1 car less than El Toro, which seats 36 passengers. The seats themselves are relatively tight and have no seat padding, which is not really appreciated considering those moments of airtime you're going to be lifted up and then brought back down. A cushion definitely would have been nice. Unfortunately, the only thing that's there in the center is this leg divider that kind of rides up your butt. Not personally a fan of these. It also does have this retractable seat belt, which really does not help the operations because unfortunately, Colossus does have notoriously slow dispatches. So be aware of that. As you depart from the station, you'll start up your massive lift hill with a very quiet chain lift. Having been riding El Toro for over 10 years, I'm used to that silent cable, and if you were to close your eyes and listen, you might think for a second that Colossus also has a cable lift. But no, it's a chain, just dead silent, which is a big contrast from that click-clack that we're all used to. As you reach the peak, you'll crest over and make a 90-degree right-hand turn and start descending down your drop at 61 degrees, which I'm not gonna lie is a bit of a ramp. It's very Roller Coaster Tycoon-esque. It still manages to give airtime in the back, which is a lot of fun, but they certainly improved on this when they did El Toro, because that drop is 15 degrees steeper and one of the best on the planet. Here's where we reach our max speed of 68 miles per hour. The bottom of this drop is actually pretty forceful, probably the highest G's on the entire ride. And you're then flung up into 2 back-to-back massive airtime hills. And these are, in my opinion, the best parts of the ride. If you sit up front, it's almost ejector airtime. I would describe it as really strong floater. And while I recommend riding in both the front and back of the train, I did prefer this in the front, which was enough to make that my favorite seat. I can only imagine what these hills would have felt like pre-refurbishment because now there are trims on both hills on the entry and exit. Something you might only notice if you're in the front row if you're really paying attention, but they're still there, and it's definitely affecting the speed. But next up is the furthest point of the ride. You're going to rise up into this turnaround, getting some uplifting airtime, and then you'll proceed to build up some speed as you're banking downwards to start your return trip. And unfortunately, this is where things take a nosedive. Following this turn, we have 2 more hills that do anything but give airtime. In the front, you feel nothing, and that is just really disappointing considering what the ride had set up at the beginning. You go in with this expectation, and then it doesn't meet it. If you're sitting in the back, you might lift up out of your seat a little bit, but it's going to be gentle. Regardless, though, of where you're sitting, the next speed hill is very, very lame. Absolutely nothing there. It's like it is gently trying, but it doesn't work. It's just not profiled for airtime. And I think part of it is that you do feel a lot of that speed die off with the trip back out versus the rest of the ride. Luckily, it's able to make up some of it coming up here soon, but until then, it really just is anticlimactic. And that is what will lead you into probably the biggest difference between Colossus and El Toro, and that is this huge Helix halfway through the ride. I always thought this was an odd choice, especially since a Helix is usually thrown in at the end of an attraction as a way of just killing off excess speed. A lot of Helices can end up feeling kind of pointless, and unfortunately this is one of those. The first half especially is just a huge dead spot on Colossus. Luckily, the second half starts to build up a bit more of that speed that you lost earlier on, so that leads you out to the final third of the ride, which are these smaller hills positioned right towards that massive giant creature, which is incredible. The detail put into this figure is amazing, and from the rider's perspective, it really does look like he's ripping up a section of track and you're about to derail. But the trick is you actually drop down to go straight in his mouth. Fire shoots out above, you blast through the mist out the other end, which is nowhere near as pretty. And then finally is one last drawn out turn, and that's what takes you to the brake run. Those last hills are pretty gentle, and that giant figure is single-handedly the thing that makes that ending interesting. My first ride on Colossus was in the back of the train, and it was just an all-around odd experience for me. I think I definitely would have enjoyed it more if I hadn't done El Toro first, because it had set my expectations pretty high. I had heard that Colossus wasn't as good, but I didn't know in what way it wasn't as good. Don't get me wrong, when you're sitting in the train and riding along the track, that part feels identical. But the forces are fundamentally different. Despite its shallow first drop, the attraction does have a still enjoyable beginning, but unfortunately a borderline boring middle and an okay ending. And that is what leads to the mixed opinions. Because it's not too often that you have such a big roller coaster that starts with these really strong moments and then follows up with some serious weak spots. And frankly, Colossus is one of those attractions that has those shortcomings that you really kind of have to look past to enjoy it. And during my time at Heide Park, I did get several laps in on Colossus, really trying to get the best feel for it that I could. And by the end of the day, I was able to appreciate its good moments. But when I still look at the ride in the grand scheme of things within the theme park industry, the attraction just does not stack up. It is not my favorite wooden roller coaster in Germany. I would give that to Woden Timber Coaster at Europa Park, but it is also not my least favorite wooden coaster in Germany. It'd be pretty tough to beat Bandit, and I really ended up walking away from Colossus saying, you know, I fully expected that this would be the best attraction in the park, and to an extent, I think it might be. But I really do believe that Heide Park is still lacking that big signature roller coaster, that OMG wow experience. It felt like Colossus was designed to be that with its intimidating height, high speeds, long track length, but from a rider perspective and how those forces feel, it does not reach that status. It's like your eyes tell you one thing and then your body tells you another. How it looks is drastically different from how it feels. And if anything, it actually made me appreciate El Toro even more. An attraction that, even though that is not perfect, I think I sometimes take for granted. It was a reminder to me of how truly incredible that roller coaster is. And if you've experienced Colossus, but not yet El Toro, I think El Toro would blow your mind. But for Colossus's final score, I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. It's far from a bad ride. The only thing that I would actually call unpleasant maybe about it is the seats. But it's very smooth, has a great theme, and the airtime that it does have is fun. But I can't give it a higher score when there's just too many moments that leave me wanting more. Which is why when I think of the best wooden roller coasters in the entire world, Colossus, unfortunately, is not an attraction that comes to mind. But I'm still immensely glad that I had the opportunity to experience it, and I want to hear from you guys down in the comments below. What are your thoughts on Colossus Battle of the Giants at Heide Park in Germany? Do you agree with the points that I brought up? Do you think there's anything I missed? Be sure to post that down below, and stay tuned for more here at Coaster Studios, and I'll see you next time.